Hello, welcome again to this, which is our 8th Bartitsu online session, which means we've been in lockdown now, or at least I've been in lockdown now for 2 months, which is starting to feel like forever, and I've completely forgotten what normal life was, but I don't remember it being that great that I'm desperate to hurry back to it. So, I'm going to assume it's all good, so we're here. For the next hour, we're going to be taking a look at a bit of grappling and some of that jiu-jitsu content that I've talked about previously in Bartitsu. So, what I'm going to start with doing is introducing you to the newest member of our group who has recently joined us, and by that I mean in the last week. And this is Troy, who is standing behind me here, who's raring to go. Was giving me some SmackDown talk earlier, so I'm looking forward to horribly abusing him for your pleasure. So, this is Troy. He will be joining us and hopefully allowing me to demonstrate things a bit better than if I was going, if you imagine there's an arm here, well, at least now it might be a bit floppy, but there is at least an arm that I can mangle for your entertainment. So, this is Troy. Troy is going to now move across here for a moment whilst I do a bit of talking. Is he still on screen there? Yeah, we can still see Troy. There he is. Good.
Yep.
So.
Hi, Troy.
So, yes.
Troy doesn't have to worry about social distancing.
No, Troy doesn't have to worry about social distancing. It is one of the great facts that allows me to train. What I really need to do is, when I was going into lockdown, have thought about this and then kidnapped one of my students just to live with me for several months. I'm sure nobody would have minded that at all. But
is this the first time?
Without having that forethought, instead here we are. But we now have Troy, so hopefully we can start looking at some of the grappling content that we couldn't last week. But hopefully you enjoyed the Sabre class that we did last week, giving you a chance to have a look at some of that. Anyway, let's move on and not just talk about all of these kind of things. What I will tell you, the other thing about Troy is, given his size, he's actually 6 foot when standing up fully, and is about human-sized and proportions. And I'm going to tell you what, if you leave him in the middle of the kitchen, forget he's there and come down in the middle of the night, you will literally crap yourself. I can say from honest testimony, this guy scared the crap out of me so many times last week. In fact, so much so I put him in the garage last night and had to leave a sign on the door for my wife saying, "Troy's in the garage, don't freak out." So that when she went in, there wasn't just some looming figure in the garage. Anyway, enough of that. Troy's freaky, but we're going to punish him for it later, so it's all good. Right, so yeah, we're going to be looking at grappling, which is obviously very different to what we've been doing so far, which has all been more impact-based. Punching, kicking, swishing a cane around. All of that is about landing a solid blow on your opponent. What we're doing today isn't. It's about manipulating your opponent's skeleton and the attached muscles and ligaments and all the rest of it to convince them to go where you want them to. That can be by physically locking joints and moving them. It can be by creating pain to drastically encourage them to do what you want. But it's a much more subtle and technical form of fighting than I put my fist in his face. So that's kind of what we're going to be looking at today. It does involve a little bit more flexibility in things like your wrists, your elbows, in fact pretty much your whole body. So just be aware of that, and if you suffer from back problems like I do, you've just got to be a little bit careful about what you're doing when you're practicing this. When you're on your own or you're practicing with a training dummy, relatively easy, but just if at any point you're ever trying any of this with another person, just go slow, find the position, then apply pressure. If you go straight into it, it's very easy to overdo it and end up injuring yourself or being injured by the person you're training with. So always find the lock and then apply the pressure slowly, and universally double tap either the floor, your opponent, yourself. That is universal signal for, "Oh, you've got it, can you stop now?" Okay? You concede. They got whatever lock they were trying to do, and that's you giving up, okay? Useful one to know and get into the habit of, as far as I'm aware, every jiu-jitsu club, Bartitsu club, grappling club I've ever been to, that is a universal sign for stop now. Okay, so that if you look nothing else, that's the one to go. Probably won't work in a street fight, but if you're ever training with anybody else, good trick to know. So, we're going to start off a little bit today by talking about ranges. because I've mentioned these before, but I thought we'd just spend a little bit of time just catching up on what I mean by this. So, I have a stationary target here in the form of Troy. And we really have 4 distinct ranges that we work in Bartitsu. Okay? So let's look through the classes we've done and see if we can identify what those ranges are. So the first classes we did were on pugilism. So we're out here, and those are kind of our punches coming in at this range. Okay? This is what I would call striking range. Okay? And it's really range 3 of 4. Okay? And it's the same range that you're going to use your kicks at. If I'm coming in here, round, knee, all of these I can kind of land from that same kind of striking range. Okay? So that's 3. We then moved further out into what I'd call weapon range. Okay? So I now have my cane. I'm going to disappear slightly off the screen so that I can strike now and hit him with a cane. Okay? That gives me striking range, which is range 2 of 4. If I go further away, and I will disappear, but hopefully you can still hear me, I now cannot reach him with a cane. This is what we call conversational distance. I'm now out of range. I cannot hurt him, okay? Without a projectile weapon. But for Bartitsu, we don't cover projectile weapons. So, we've got conversational range, weaponry range, striking range, and then today we're going to talk about the last one, which is where I end up right in here, at this kind of range here, and we're throwing each other about, which is grappling range. And that's the one we're going to talk about today. But it's important to understand those 4 ranges because you have to fight differently in each one. If I start throwing punches when I'm in weaponry range, I won't hit. Okay? If I start trying to throw weaponry strikes while I'm in grappling, it won't work. I have to use different techniques. Equally, if I'm at conversational range, this is actually an important range for Bartitsu, one I might talk about in another class, but it involves a lot of what nowadays people refer to as conflict resolution, de-escalation. It's all of the kind of psychology stuff of, can I stop this fight actually happening? And can I do it at a range when neither of us are in danger? So conversational, gets a bit closer. Can I lamp them with something I'm holding? Gets a bit closer still, I can use my fists and my feet. Gets closer again, and we get into grappling. So those are really the 4 ranges that we talk about for Bartitsu. The other thing that's important is learning how to move from one to another, okay? Because I can't go here and go from here, I enact my grapple. Because he will probably punch me as I'm stepping in, okay? I mean, Troy won't because he's really well trained and will just sit there and do what he's told, okay? But you try it on even a barely trained student, they'll take a pop at you as you're stepping in, okay? So you need to be able to learn to transition correctly, yeah? If I've got a cane and I want to step in and move into doing some punching and kicking, if they're armed with a cane, that movement time is time where I'm getting hit, yeah? If I'm in grappling and want to move back, how do I do that without either not being allowed to because they grapple me back, or indeed stepping back and getting punched as I'm doing it? These transitions and moving between ranges are actually really important. Okay, I'm not going to cover them all today. What I want to look at for this first section is how do I get from here into grappling range with him. Okay, that's where we're going to start. We will look at others at other times, but for now I just want to get from striking range into grappling range so that I can actually grab him and get on with this. So I'm just going to have to keep a vague check on time and see it. No, I can't even see it on my phone. So, we'll just run over it. It's all fine. Right, okay. So, the first one we're going to look at is also the most difficult to demonstrate on a dummy, okay? What I essentially need to do is find a covered way of moving from here, my Bartitsu guard, from here to here where we're actually in physical contact. The first one we're going to look at is one called smash and grab, because it's really simple, and essentially all I'm going to do is, because my hands are quite high with this guard, yeah? If I was using a more traditional, kind of Mendoza style or something, my hands would be a lot lower. this would be a lot harder a technique. But because the Bartitsu guard is traditionally quite high, I can get my hands above theirs, and that's where I need to be. So what I'm going to do is get my hands above theirs and literally use my drop step that we've talked about in other classes. I'm lifting my foot and letting my body weight drag me down, and I slam my hands into the top of theirs. So from their guard, boom, it gets knocked down and out of the way. And the minute it does that, I've gone down, I've got that coiled back leg now, I can push forward and get into contact with my opponent. So from guard, drop step, lunge. Yeah? And I can get in here and grab him. So that's your first technique, you smash and grab. Smash the hands down, get in and grab. Okay? As I said, it's hard to do because Troy's arms don't stay up. But if you imagine he's there, my down is knocking them there, and then my lunge is going in to grab the head. I mean, I can grab other things, it's just if you can get the head, why not go for it? Okay, well, we'll straighten him up again. He's starting to slouch. You just can't get the staff these days, can you? Right, okay, next one we're going to look at is probably the most common, which is the block and grab. And in this case, Troy's going to try and punch me in the face. Okay, so I will block that. Whoop, and it ends up Troy's hand on top of mine because I've blocked up, if you remember back to our nice block up here. Now rather than what I'd normally do was block and come back to guard, instead after I've blocked, whoops, I've done my punch up the middle, turned my hand and got my block, I'm going to push forward and this hand goes to the shoulder. And I've got his shoulder there, the other hand is then going to come in and grab whatever I can on my opponent. So step one, block. Make sure you're covered. Make sure you're not getting hit. Once you've got that, that hand can just slide straight forward until it finds the shoulder. And you're in and you've grabbed. Now obviously you've got to be a bit careful about what they're doing with their other hand. Sorry, I'm just slightly worried he's going to... What they're doing with the other hand, but punch comes in, block, guard up, grab the shoulder, in with the other hand, and you're into your grapple. So that's your second one, is you can block and then move in. Now there's a variation of this that a lot of people like, which has this really, really high guard. So rather than what we would do is block just above your head, this is a block where the hand actually extends all the way up. So rather than a block being here, the block comes right the way out over the top, almost like a weird punch up at 45 degrees. So what I can do there is if I can get in and get that in, as I move, I can get right the way in, their hands on the outside, and I can get a good wrap on the back of the neck. Or, I'll do it from the other side, if I go up and over, it's really easy to wrap that arm, and if I can get to one side, I can get a really good control over this shoulder. One hand on the shoulder, one hand under the arm with that as a wrap over the top, okay? So that's an alternate way of doing that one. It's a more modern version that was taught in Bartitsu, but it is used a lot, and I've seen a lot of people in Bartitsu circles using it. So this kind of shooting out parry. Okay, and it fits very much into some of the Montserrat stuff as well. If you remember me talking about him back in like week 1 or 2. Right, the next one I want to look at is, rather than being defensive, we can also do a punch and grab. Okay, so in this case, normally if I go to punch, okay, my opponent blocks. Yeah, so I withdraw my hand back again. I punch and I bring it back. And I get used to throwing a punch out rather than leaving it out there. But in this instance, I throw the punch and the hand comes up to block. What I want to do there is, rather than bringing the arm back, I leave it there. So as they start to return to guard, I'm going to come over the top and grab that arm. You're quite likely to trap this arm in between you, but that's not a problem. Okay? So I block, as they recover, use that opportunity to drive forward. They think they've just stopped your attack. Okay? So you can throw out your punch and then step in to grab. Again with that push from that shuffle off the back leg. Okay? So we also have, if I do that from the other side, so if I punched, the block was there, It's as it goes down to recover that that hand can catch the shoulder and in. I do realise I've missed out a few closing things, but I'll talk about that in a minute. So we've had the smash and grab, the block and grab, the punch and grab. Okay? Those are probably... Oh no, I have done it in the right reason, I'm just not obeying my own thing. Those are all ways that I can get in and get a good solid grip, okay? Whether that is just bashing a way in, brute force, whether that is after I've defended, taking the initiative off my opponent, or whether that's attacking and using that moment they think they're safe to get in and establish a grapple, okay? These are all good options. A lot of people, when you talk to people who actually do a lot of grappling, is they will just say, you're going to concede a couple of hits getting in to grab the other guy. Okay? And that's kind of fine if you're a bruiser, if you're good at taking a hit. Okay? Some people are, some people aren't. Okay? If you're good at taking a couple of hits and the other guy's half your size, yeah, let's not worry about it too much. But if it's the other way around and you're the smaller guy who's not getting good at getting hit and the other guy's big, you want to make sure you get in under a decent cover. And these are 3 techniques that will get you in there into that grappling position. Now, of course, we don't have to make it something that's obviously a grappling thing. Yeah, when we've gone with our hands, we've been blocking, we've been smashing out the way, we've been controlling their arms, and then getting in for a grab. We can actually use other techniques to kind of draw their attention away rather than forcing our way through their guard to grab them. We can also distract their guard so that we can get in. And the standard way to do that is hurt them somewhere else. So a traditional way of getting in would be something like, if you remember going back to our savate, our chasse lateral, which is a side kick. We're not going to do it up at the stomach. This is just going to be a little one down at the leg. But it's delivered with a little bit of a shuffle. Yep, so it's exactly the same as we did, I think it was like move 1 of the form that we looked at for savate. In there, very quick. Now the advantage of this is, partly, I've hit them in the shin. All of their attention goes down. The other thing is my back foot has moved in. Yeah, it's gone from being over here to about here. I've taken about a foot of ground. Which means when I bring myself forward again back into my guard, that foot closer puts me into grappling range. Okay? So I cause pain and move closer. And then, whilst they're not thinking about their guard, it's going to be much easier for me to smash and grab or move their hands out of the way. Or their hands may just drop as they look down and you can get in and get your grapple. Okay? So you don't always have to be looking for a way through with your hands. You can cause damage somewhere else and then get in. Using that same principle, I was looking at a lateral there. You could do the same thing with a frontal, chasse frontal. Not on a low one, but this would probably have to be a med. This is a nad shot. Stomach, you just want to get their attention. But again, it comes with that little shuffle. So from here, so when I fall forward, I'm into my grappling range. So I'm a little bit out. I can do this one slightly further away than I can with the lateral, which is the advantage of it. And I'm down, and I'm into this range here. A second slight shuffle puts me right into my grappling range. So you can use those little shuffle chasses. The other thing we can do is we can do a fouetti. This is a side kick, where I'm going to come from the back leg right the way through with a kick to my opponent. Round here. Now, we haven't covered fouettis in a lot of detail. The important thing is you can't block a fouetti with your hand. You can't just knock it down like you can the others. The others, the energy's coming at you, you can move it. This one, the energy's coming into the side of you. If you try and block that, your hand against their leg. Your hand loses. So, there are 2 options. Either, like most people, they'll step back out of range, okay? But that's fine. If I kick, they step back out of range, I haven't lost anything, okay? They have given as much ground as I've taken. All we've done is probably changed which stance we're in. I've gone from left hand to right hand to left hand forward, okay? Really easy to do. That's fine. They might not get out of the way quick enough, especially if you aim it lower. So rather than coming through here, if I bring that through at the leg, people feel a lot less threatened by it. They might slip the leg up just over the top. They might slip it back without giving anything in terms of distance. They might just take it, especially if you're aiming more at the shin or whatever than the knee or the ankle. And if they do that, then you're in. Boom. Grappling range. Perfect. The other option is they might charge you. That's really their only other response to you doing that. Their only other response to you doing this kick. And if they decide to charge you, slam that foot down, they've chosen to take it to grappling, which is where you want it to be. So it's all good. Yeah, and the last thing they're going to expect is for you to be like, great, there's the grapple I'm looking for, and into my next move. Okay? So you can use these kicks and things as a way to get in as well. So you can move the guard, you can wait for something more dynamic, you're going to block or you're going to punch, and then work that into your grapple. Or you can start with distracting things low and then coming in with the grapple. Of course, potentially if your opponent's back to you, you might be able to get a grapple without them ever seeing you, but then really we're on to group tactics or some kind of weird assassination stuff you should not be involved with. Go and tell the police. So we're not going to worry about that for now, but those are some different ways that I can close from this striking range. I can get into my grappling range and start to mess Troy up a little bit. So one of the things we need to be aware of is how the grab is actually done. Now, the traditional jiu-jitsu grab is what we call a collar and elbow grab, okay? And this is because Troy here has grabbed my collar. And in response, I've looped my hand over and got his elbow. In return, I grab his collar and he loops his hand around. I'm wondering if I can actually do this with this. It's not going to hold too well. But essentially, he ends up with my arm, I've got his shoulder. He has my shoulder, I have his arm, and we kind of wrestle in this position until we find one of us gets the advantage or tries something. This is the standard collar and elbow grab. If I show it from the other side, that would be he's on my elbow and I've got this hand down here, whilst my hand is on his shoulder at the back. Okay? He's not cooperating, I tell you. There we go, in here. And that's just a slightly different version of the same thing. He's going to fall off his perch. That's next week when you get to come off. Today you sit. Right, so that's your traditional collar and elbow grab. And if you look at any jiu-jitsu stuff, they'll talk about getting the sturdy collar of their gi, and then you get the material of their jacket, and you fold it over and get your thumb inside, so you've got a really good hold on them in their gi jacket, which is great if you're doing jiu-jitsu or karate or something where they wear a gi. Or indeed you happen to be out and the other guy's wearing a jacket. It's not always possible. When we train, we tend to be wearing a t-shirt. Okay, you can grab the collar of a t-shirt, but if you try and throw somebody by their t-shirt, there's a good chance you'll end up holding their t-shirt and they won't move. Okay, it's happened in classes. It's wonderfully hilarious. It's not great on your clothing build. So what you've got to do is get used to being able to grab somebody, okay? So I don't want to spend a lot of time looking at the techniques of how you hold somebody when you get in there. It's going to depend how you end up, and it's going to depend what you're holding. Okay, clothing is great, but if not, there's enough meat normally on your kind of top of your trapezius here? I think that's trapezius. You can get a decent hold of it, okay? Likewise, don't try and grab the elbow, hook the hand over, and get it solidly into the crease of the elbow so you can control the arm. So in those kind of ways, you get used to grappling somebody by grabbing them and not what they happen to be wearing. That's something that just comes with experience. We also have something to replicate this we call zombie drill, which if you're doing any grappling, I would advise you add this as a step into your training, okay? And the idea of this is when I grapple, I'm very rarely going to end up in a nice collar and elbow hold, okay? That tends to only happen when both of you want that hold. What tends to happen is you end up in a really awkward position. So to simulate this, We have zombie drill. You close your eyes, and your opponent closes their eyes, and you wave your hands around in front of you as you walk forward in weird and various ways until you make contact with the other person. And you close up, and whatever place you're in, that is you're starting to grapple from. From whatever position you end up, you need to find a shoulder, find an arm, break some space and get over the top, and then look for your throw. You have to be able to work from where you end up. You can't count upon being able to get a clean hold, because real life combat and real life sparring even doesn't give you nice textbook holds. It gives you messy things you have to work with. Okay, so that drill is worth putting in there. Once you've got the hang of that and you can get in, whatever you end up, you can move it around until you've got a hold of something you can actually work with. Then you're starting to look at proper grappling. Okay, we're only looking at standing grappling today, partly because we don't want to end up on the floor. It's not a good place to be from a self-defense point of view. It works great in a sport context. Yeah, if there's you and one other guy in a nicely cleaned, floored area and you're sparring, going to the ground, your groundwork can be great and it's wonderful. If you're in the street and you've got a mate and you don't know whether there's glass on the floor or people's bags or some discarded high heel shoes, you don't want to hit the ground with any force and be rolling around there, okay, whilst his mate kicks you in the head. You want to stay upright, you want to do your fighting there. So that's why we're focusing on the standing grappling. We will look at some throws because we quite like the idea of throwing our opponent, but we don't want to end up on the ground. So I'm probably not going to cover much in the way of ground game. We do have some, but we don't use it a lot. It's not a focus of what we're trying to do. Which would be a difference if you went, say, for a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu class. It would be, a good chunk of it would be groundwork. So I'm off on a tangent here. And I'm not even reached my rambling phase yet. Okay, so the other thing I would talk about is when you grab somebody is a technique called ragging. Once you've got somebody, if I get into my nice collar and elbow hold here, and then we start going, oh, well, maybe I want to go this way. Could I? By the time you're thinking all this, yeah, you don't have time. So what you do is you get in there and you start to pull that person around, okay? So whether you've got a hand around the back of the head or on an arm, you start moving them around. They'll be trying to do it to you as well. So you end up with this kind of struggle, which isn't so much about trying to get a better position. It's initially just trying to stop the other guy thinking clearly whilst you're trying to think of what you're doing. Okay? If you had a plan when you went in, that's great. You don't need that phase. You can rag a little and throw somebody. But if in doubt and you have hold of somebody, move them, especially if you can move the head around. Okay, if your head is all over here, your eyes are trying to process all that information, your equilibrium and your ears are going all over the place, there's less you can do to actually process what you want to do in terms of tactics. Okay, so get in there, grab somebody, rag them around a bit. It's worth knowing. Okay, that kind of takes us to the end of that first bit, which is how do I get into a grappling situation. We're going to take a short break whilst I talk about kind of related stuff in my rambling section, and then we're going to look at horrible things we can do once we're actually in that grappling stage. So I'm just going to grab a quick drink. So, what are we going to talk about today for a bit of a ramble? Well, we're looking at Jiu-Jitsu, and one of the things that I'm fascinated by is not so much the origin of Jiu-Jitsu. Okay, a lot of people love the whole tracing it back. I mean, from my understanding, I think it starts, you get India going up to the Shaolin monks, going across to Okinawa, across from there to Japan, and then we have it from Japan back to England. There you go. There's a vague lineage if you really want one that goes back 1,000 years or so. What interests me is what it was being used for in Bartitsu, and particularly in the time period, okay? And the particular thing that is interest to us, and we've done a lot of talks on this and a lot of demonstrations and stuff about this, is something called the Suffragujitsus, or Pankhurst Amazons, or Pankhurst Bodyguards. So, for those of you who may not be particularly familiar, or maybe from further afield and this isn't stuff you covered in school, here in the UK we had something called the suffragette movement. Okay, and this was largely women weren't allowed to vote, and they felt that was very unfair, so they were trying to get the vote. And this really starts with, and I've written the names down because I always get them the wrong way around, you have the National Union of Women's Suffrage Societies, who are a pressure group. They are applying pressure on Parliament, they're petitioning Parliament, they're holding rallies, and they're trying to get women to be given the vote. That's kind of all happening. However, there's a group within that, particularly led by a woman called Mrs. Pankhurst, who I'm sure you've heard of, who basically thinks this isn't moving fast enough and the tactics are not extreme enough. So, in 1903, she separates off the Women's Social and Political Union. Very similar sounding group, but they bud off. But rather than being peaceful and kind of a pressure group, they start moving to much more shock and awe tactics to get their message out there. So depending on which side of the argument you are, they're either wonderful freedom fighters for women's lib, or they're domestic terrorists. The truth is probably there were a bit of both, but what they were doing is they split away, and they started off with like disrupting meetings and asking awkward questions and just embarrassing people that are not used to women speaking up to them. So they were cornering Churchill and asking him questions, and he didn't like that, and other men didn't like that. So then they kind of moved on from that, and they started disrupting particularly sporting events, because that was something that men did, so they could go and interrupt that. And chain themselves to railings to prevent those events kind of happening. They kind of moved up and started doing arson and actually kind of like burning slogans into the greens. Particularly, I think it was a tennis match, but don't quote me on that. They moved on from there. They started doing a lot of kind of window smashing, kind of vandalism stuff. They got really into their arson for a while, and they tried to tried to burn the coronation seat throne in Westminster Abbey. And they set fire to a lot of mailboxes, and eventually moved up to actually detonating bombs. So, whatever else you think about them, you can't deny they did a lot of property damage and probably a lot of personal damage. It wasn't really recorded that much because poor people got hurt rather than rich people, and they weren't important. I'm glad life has changed to some extent a little bit. Let's not get political on this. Let's move on. So, anyway, what happens is, obviously, they're committing these acts that is getting things spoken about, getting women's suffrage a conversation that's happening all around the place. However, they are also committing things that are illegal. So the police arrest them and normally fine them for these kind of activities, because most of them are actually very well-to-do women. They're not poor women, they are women with rich and respectable husbands, or women of independent wealth. So they fine them, and the women refuse to pay the fines because then they get thrown in prison, and that does much more for getting their message out there and getting people talking. So they end up in prison, and the habit was then to go on a hunger strike and refuse to eat anything. So these women got very ill, and were eventually, a bill was passed, which was, again, I've written it down because I'm not good at these kind of things. I know it's the Cat and Mouse Act, but it was actually the Temporary Discharge for Ill Health measure was passed, which meant these women who were on hunger strikes could be released to go home, recuperate, eat, and then they would be rearrested for their original crime and put back in prison. At which point they went straight back on a hunger strike until they got released again, and you got what they called the Cat and Mouse Act. These same women being released and recaptured over and over again. To break this deadlock, this is really where our interest comes in, particularly with a woman called Edith Garud, who is I think her husband was a physical education instructor for the universities, but she was also very well trained physically and in martial arts. She also trained with the Bartitsu Society, particularly in jiu-jitsu, and then her, along with unnamed members of the society, were actually holding secret training classes with a hand-selected group of women from the suffragette movement. So they were meeting up in kind of private and teaching these women how to deal with being grabbed, and how to deal with, particularly, how to deal with the police. How to immobilise the police, how to hurt the police, how to stop other people being taken away by the police. So what would happen is a woman would get released to recuperate, the police would turn up to rearrest her, and instead be met by a group of the bodyguards who would turn the policemen out, and they wouldn't be able to arrest these women. This escalated till eventually I think you end up with like the Battle of Glasgow, where you end up with about 30 of the bodyguards against 50 police in an open brawl in the street. these women were being talked about because they were taking on 3 or 4 police. I mean, nowadays it's unthinkable because most policemen would have an understanding of jiu-jitsu and grappling, but at the time they didn't. This was new. So these women were throwing these policemen around. There's a wonderful comic strip, which if you haven't seen, just Google suffragette beats up police and it'll probably be like the first 5 images. And it's just a woman standing there with policemen all around her, and it's just like the suffragette who knew jiu-jitsu. And there's just policemen lying all over the place and just one woman standing there. It's a wonderful comic. But this was also being talked about and got their stuff recognised. And obviously it's important for us because it links in with the Bartitsu Society and particularly the jiu-jitsu that was being used in London. Now, to finish off the story, the suffragettes never actually achieved their aim in the way they intended to, because what actually happens is we have the start of the First World War, at which point the suffragettes decide to put domestic kind of violence and terrorism to one side and throw their efforts behind the war effort, because that's seen as the greater evil, with the plan of coming back to all of this the other side of the war. What actually happens is the men go off to fight and the women end up taking on a lot of the jobs that the men had whilst they're away fighting. So when they come back, it's very hard for the men to then turn around and go, you can't do the jobs that we can, because they're like, well, we just have for the last 10 years. So what happens is the women are finally given the vote. Well, in fact, in 1918, some women are given the vote. I think it's those who are like over 30 and happen to own a small fortune. I think it might have been a property. I can't remember what the values are. Yeah, but a woman had to own land and be over 30. And then it was another 10 years later before you actually have the equality of women's rights, and they're given the same voting rights as men. But that doesn't happen, till quite late on. But sadly, we never find out whether the suffragettes would have actually won or not, because things took a different turn. History went through the war, and that kind of solved the problem. So anyway, there's a little bit on women's suffrage for you, and a little bit on the suffrage jiu-jitsus. Well worth looking at. There's actually a graphic novel that's been written called The Suffrage Jiu-Jitsu that's very good as well. It has a lovely, it's kind of a fantasy thing, but it has lots of the people that I've been talking about kind of make cameos in it. So if you can find a copy as well, worth having a look at. How am I doing time-wise?
Time is 25 to.
25 to. Okay, not doing too badly then. Right, so we're going to go back to looking at what we're going to do with poor Troy here, because we've now got him and we're in the grappling range. The question is, what are we going to do to him? Well, one of the options is dirty boxing, but we're not going to come to that because we're going to talk about that next week. So the question is, I'm going to look at some grappling, okay? And we're going to see how this goes, because a lot of it's going to depend on camera angle. So I'm really going to make Michael work today, because he's going to have to tell me whether it's actually visible or not, or whether I need to turn Troy around and try again from another angle.
Roger that.
So, what we have is Troy is here. There's actually a few things I can do that work on that grappling principle before I get right into my grappling with him. So, for example, if he was to punch me, I can quite happily block that. Okay? Now, as we've looked at before, I could then use that block to move in and look at a grapple. But instead, if I block with the other hand, now bear in mind, most of these punches come through the central point because they're going through your face. So you can block equally with either hand. So if I block with the off hand, I can then roll that hand round and turn it into a grab. Okay? So if you imagine I catch the hand with a block here, trying to see if I can get the angle there, with a block here, I can roll my little finger across and turn that into a grapple. So from the block there, roll it over the top into a grapple. So I block, turn that into a grapple and step forward, and I'm going to put my forearm, this is an elbow here, you can see it goes up. I'm going to put my hand on back of the elbow and push until the elbow is going the wrong way. Okay? So I've now got a leverage point at the wrist and at the elbow, and I can put a lot of force into that. Now, at this point, either the shoulder has to follow, because that's just how the body works. Yeah, once this is fully extended, if I can't move the arm further that way, the shoulder has to move that way. Or I'd snap the elbow and I actually dislocate the elbow and the whole arm gets kind of messed up. So you can quite happily, once you get in there and you've got that, you can use that kind of control of a straight arm bar to control somebody. Sometimes you can use it to take them to the floor, but it's a fairly good and effective way of doing that. And it really is just a case of finding the arm, blocking the wrist, finding the elbow, and then just pushing the wrist one way and the elbow the other. Okay? It's a bog standard technique that's used in a lot of martial arts. The arm bar is a fairly standard one. There's a slight variation on it that we use, which is called the escorting a gentleman from the room. Now, the idea of this one is sometimes you want a grapple that isn't 100% offensive. Okay? Now, the example for this one is given if you are at a nice high-class do, as I'm sure most of you are very often, and your uncle's there. You know, the one who drinks too much and makes the racist and sexist comments that are meant to be funny but aren't, and embarrasses the whole family in front of everybody else. So what you've got to do is get your drunk uncle out of the room without actually hurting him. And this is where grappling like this comes in. So what we're looking at is that same thing. It can be done from a punch turned into a grab. But obviously bear in mind there's nothing to stop me if this isn't offensive. If I can just grab the hand, that works perfectly well. And with a drunk person, they may be trying to hug you or whatever, so it's really easy just to take that hand off and turn it into a grapple really easily. But once I've got a hold of the wrist, rather than using the forearm into the back of the elbow, I'm going to move a little bit further and reach right the way over the top of the arm. From there, I'm going to fold it underneath, so the crease of their elbow is now kind of over my forearm, and I put my hand on the back of my own forearm. And what I can do there is essentially exert that pressure to then control that whole arm without any possibility of it being damaged in any way. And then I can just move them around by the shoulder. Let's just try. So if I've got an arm here, the idea is if I've grabbed it, I'm trying to think. So if I've grabbed it here, I'm going to go over the top, underneath, and onto my own forearm. So what you can see is that the cane is trapped. I mean, my hands are flat. There is no grabbing of that cane. And yet it is completely trapped within my arms. And if this end behind me here was attached to a shoulder, I can then escort them from the room quite happily without causing any damage. So that's a worthwhile one to know. And again, it crops up in a few of the Bojitsu books, so it's quite a nice canonical one. So that's your escorting a gentleman from the room. Next one, we looked at the straight arm bar, which from here going through. We can also look at a bent arm bar, because if you think about the way the elbow works, okay, if my arm's bent, and I take it here, and I apply pressure this way, it moves, yeah? My elbow is quite happy rotating in that direction. Now if I take it the other way, I get to about here, and now it's locked. And any further pressure, you can see that's affecting my back and my shoulder rather than my arm. Yeah? And I can use that quite happily. So if I can get a block against an opponent here, and their arm is bent, try and twist a little so you can see a bent arm, I can actually reach underneath what is there, this would be their kind of tricep here. I can reach underneath and up to take hold of their wrist. Yeah, I mean, you can keep this hand on here just for extra security, but you don't actually need it. And what you end up with is what they call a figure four lock. Yeah, my arm and these bits kind of make up a vague four. And that's just holding that arm in that position, slightly forced out to the side like this. Yeah? So that my hand, see if I can do this, is essentially replacing the cane there. So if any pressure I apply moves my body. So from there again, if they don't move, you break the arm or the elbow. And if they do move, you can again just flip them right over onto the floor or just control them if they're happy to move with you. So the figure four arm bar is quite good. So you can get a block here, come through, find the bend in the elbow, catch the wrist, and you've got complete control over that arm. Yeah? I'm hoping that this is making some sense with Troy here. I assure you it would make less if he wasn't. So, okay, so we've looked at a straight arm bar, a bent arm bar, and the scorching gentleman from the room. Now let's get into what we're really looking at. Once I get in close, and we're right into this kind of collar and elbow, we're in here and we're grappling, what is it that I can actually do that's useful? And what we're going to look at is we're going to look at 3.5 clinches that are worth looking at, okay? The first of these is the overhook, okay? Now the reason for this one, the reason it's called an overhook, if you imagine their arm, if I go over the top of it and wrap, that is an overhook. If I go underneath and wrap, that's an underhook, okay? Nice and simple. So what we're looking at here is a situation where maybe I've got in, I've got over the top of the arm, and we're in this kind of situation here. Okay, so my arm is over the top. What I can do is if I can get it nice and close, so I've got my armpit as close to on their shoulder as possible, with their hand kind of through here. I want to make sure my hand then goes flat on their stomach. So that when I twist, and I don't know how well you can see that, their shoulder is locked again over my arm, and I'm bracing against their own stomach to push them. So it's their stomach and their hand is in the small of my back. Let's move Troy closer to the centre and see if that helps with visibility. So if I'm here, we got in and I've got my overhook. My hand goes through, so when I twist, Troy's hand is at my back, you can just about see that. My hand is on his stomach, and I can brace against my back and his stomach to force his shoulder, and then I can hold him temporarily in this position. It's not difficult for him to get out of, but I can hold him there temporarily, and whilst he's there, I can hit him. Whatever I decide that I need to do to him. So, from there, as I said, let's see, we'll see the other side actually help. So if I'm in here, I've got my overhook and I got in close. The hand comes through the middle here, hello, goes on his stomach, his hand is behind me, so when I twist, I am bracing his stomach and my back, holds him temporarily, and gives me access to potentially striking him here. Okay, it is not the greatest of techniques, it will not hold them well, but what it is if you can get an overhook in that initial entry, you have really good control of this grapple. So that clinch is a good one to go for when you've got a good control of the situation. You can give up that control to get a really good strike in before either moving on to something else, grappling, or stepping out of range. Okay? Now the important thing to understand about a clinch is you can't hold somebody in it. These techniques are transient. They allow you to temporarily tie up your opponent so you can hurt them and move on. So we moved into a grapple, I got the overhook, I got into my my clinch, I strike, and then I'm moving on to something else. Okay? So that's your first of your 3 clinches, is the overhook. The next one we're going to look at is the underhook. Let's turn it around 90 degrees, we'll just keep playing with this, we'll make it work. So, Troy's now facing us. So I'm going to have to turn my back to it a little bit. So if we get into that grapple, but this time rather than going over, I've managed to get underneath. So we're down here this time, and I want to get in close enough, so essentially my shoulder is in Troy's armpit here. Okay? From there, one hand is going to go to his shoulder, one is in, and my elbow kind of hits his kidneys. And from there I can bend him forward. Now, to give you an idea of what I'm actually talking about, I'm going to do it reversed as if this is his back. Okay? So, if I got my underhook through here, and his hand is over my shoulder, and I've got in here, one hand goes on the shoulder, the other elbow has to dig right into where those kidneys are there. Okay? So what you're going to do is you're going to get in underneath, hand on shoulder, hand on elbow, and then literally just bend them forward at about 90 degrees. Now, the most common error I see is people get underneath and either they've just got the hand on and the elbow's floating up and there's nothing to really push against. You need to get it in a really solid grip here and bend it forward from the elbow to move them. The second one is people will get in there, they'll get the shoulder, they'll get the kidneys, and then they'll bend with their waist, and they end up bent over as much as the other person is. That doesn't give you an advantage. I want to get in, bend them whilst I'm staying upright. I can bring the knee in, I can come in with a strike to the head, whatever I need to do. Okay, again, they're going to get out of it in a couple of seconds, so I've got to get them in it and exploit it as quickly as possible. So with the overhook, or underhook, bend, strike. Those are your first two that you need to be familiar with. And again, if you're doing any grappling of any system, you will have an over and an underhook. Okay? And you will notice that if we start with a collar and elbow, okay, he has my collar. What I have here is a situation where his hand is above. If I push forward, I'm into my underhook. Alternately, if I have his shoulder and he has his hand over mine there, so if I've got the collar on this side, if I push forward, my hand goes over the top and I'm looking for my overhook there. So from that collar and elbow, depending on which hand is higher or lower, if you have the collar, you can go for an overhook. If you have the elbow, you can go for an underhook really easily. Okay, so they're two really good grappling techniques. The next one we're going to look at is the head clinch. Okay, so whatever situation, this one works quite well from the smash and grab. You're going to grab the head. What you're looking for is a one-handed grab to start with. Okay? Now, the important things when grabbing the head is if you've only got one hand, it's kind of hard to keep a hold of the head. Okay? If they've got hair, that's great. Just grab the hair and you've got it. Otherwise, you kind of need to use your fingers to push into your forearm and push your elbow forward so you're actually catching that whole area. So my elbow's pushing into their chest here. The hand is on the back of the head and pulling forward as I'm pushing. So their head kind of rolls forward a little bit and gets caught in that situation. From there I can rag them, I can punch them quite happily. So from the other side, if I catch here, this elbow has to go down into the chest, the hand on the back has to pull forward, and then I've temporarily got a weak grab on them that I can exploit, move them around and strike. Now, it's again important you understand the anatomy of the neck. So, if I come in here, if you grab here onto my neck here, you can pretty much hang off it and I'm not going to bend. Because what you're actually fighting there is all of the muscles in my back. Now if you go up literally one hand space above that, to here, there's a kind of where your skull goes in, just at the base of your skull. And if you get that point and push, now you're literally just fighting two small muscles in your neck and your head will move. So here nothing happens, here your head moves really easily. So it's important to understand when you grab, I'm not trying to grab the neck, I'm trying to grab the back of the head. Okay? It doesn't look like a lot of movement, but it is the difference between making this technique work or not. Okay? So you can get in there, grab, and drag them around. One of the great things you can do from this one is once I've done a strike or something, I can look to wrap my arm behind and move into something like a guillotine hold or something. For those of you who are more advanced in your grappling and want to go down that direction. But for now, we can get in there and we can hit. That's your one-handed.
It's about 5'2", by the way.
Sorry?
It's about 5'2".
Oh, wow, I have talked way too much. Right. It's okay, I think I've actually only got one more technique to go through and it'll all be good. I might run over again this week because I tend to. The other option is to get a two-handed grab, okay? So again, much like the one-handed, I want the head, not the neck, and I want to lay my hands on top of each other. There's a lot of tendency if people want to interlace their fingers. That's a good way to get your fingers broken. One hand flat, other hand flat on top of it. And then I try to push my elbows together. So once I've got it here, I push my elbows together so that I'm applying that almost like nutcrackers across the side of their head. So once I've got in, get your grab, I'm pulling that then down towards my chest. So they're off balance and I can rag them around a lot. Okay, from here I can get my knee in if I need to come in with any kind of attack. Now the other option is they're going to be pulling up and away. So if I let them, strike them in the face, pull them back down into the clinch. Let them go when they start pulling again, bring in an elbow back down into the clinch. And I can quite happily play that game as long as they're stupid enough to keep pulling away from me. Okay? So that's your two-handed clinch. Now, as I said, all of these are temporary, so you need to learn to transition from one to the other. So we're into a grappling, I find an underhook, I turn that, move them, strike. From there, I'm going to transition across, catch the back of the head, move for a strike. From there, I'm going to an overhook on this side, strike. From there, double head grab and down. I'm not trying to grab them and hold them in a position. I'm temporarily putting them where I want them, delivering a punch, moving on to try and catch the next limb and control them. And that's really how clinching works. Once you've got the hang of that, you can just move people around and just keep hitting them at your leisure. I'm aware we're running out of time, so I'm not going to go on much more about it than that. But hopefully, with the assistance of Troy there, you got at least some of what I was talking about with those different clinches and techniques, yeah? So you can get in. Oh, hang on a second, let me just grab a quick drink. Surprisingly hard work, that thing's really heavy. So, we've looked at being able to get in, how we get in safely, what we do once we're there, how we grab them, and then we started looking at some techniques for tying them up and being able to strike back. It's quite a lot to take in, and as I said, some of it's quite technical and you're really not going to get it until you try it out with a partner. So, homework time. If you live with somebody else, randomly accost them around the house and try and get grappling to work. I'm sure they'll love you for it. It'll be fun. No, please talk to them. Please make them aware of it. If you have somebody who's willing to let you try and very gently go, does your arm bend this way? And they go, no! And you go, oh good, that works then. You can have a bit of a play around with it. If you don't, practicing grappling is really difficult. And I would recommend that you probably just don't. Go back, stick to your shadow boxing, stick to your forms, learning good quality muscle memory, and those things will help you a lot more than badly practicing grappling. Okay? I just wanted to put this in so that people had an idea of what it is we're talking about. So next week, we're going to be looking at some dirty boxing, okay? And that is, once we're in close and we're in this grab, I can throw him, I can clinch him, but I can just hurt him, okay? It's called dirty boxing because it's not allowed in modern sports boxing, but it's totally allowed in pugilism and self-defense. So we're going to look at some interesting ways to hurt an opponent whilst we're grappling them. And then weather dependent, the reason I'm inside today is it's raining outside right now, so I couldn't really do that. If it's raining again next week, I'm not sure what we'll be doing. I'll substitute in this next bit, but if we can be outside, I'm going to be throwing this guy around, and we're going to look at some takedowns and some throws in jiu-jitsu, how you put your opponent on the floor. So we're going to look at some of that next week as well. As I said, if it's raining, we might look at maybe some open hand techniques and some elbow techniques and some different options for striking, and just vary things around a little. I will put a post up and let you know. But for now, that is kind of everything I wanted to get through today, and hopefully some of it has been useful. As usual, if you do have any questions, pop them in the comments and I'll do my best to answer them. If anybody wants to shout out with any of them now, I can have a go answering them now. Other than that, message me. Always happy to talk to people about martial arts and about any of this. Now, I have realised I didn't fall in at the beginning of the class, so I'm not going to fall out at the end of the class, but that was a mistake, and well done for all noticing it.
Sorry.
No, sorry, I wasn't talking specifically to you, it's alright. So, yeah, normally I would fall in, fall out, not going to do that this week. We've been a bit more informal. We've been introducing Troy here to what it's like to be part of the forum, and I'm sure you'll be seeing a lot more of him over the coming weeks. As I use him to demonstrate various other ways of hurting people. So next week, as I said, we'll hopefully be looking at some dirty boxing and some throwing, and hopefully you'll be able to join me for that in a week's time. and I might hear from you sooner than that if you have any questions. But until then, practice, do your training. It's going to be good for you. You can't get better if you don't train. So go do your training, do your practice. Other than that, stay safe. The world is kind of crazy out there. And above all, be kind to each other. Okay. Night.